Today's mindful moment. Ever get that feeling like, something's off with those picture-perfect families you see online? Like it's all a bit too good to be true.
Yeah, totally. I mean, it's easy to get caught up in those curated images, right?
Right. So today we are taking a deep dive into a story that really peels back those layers. We're talking about Shari Franke's memoir, The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom.
Oh, this one is going to be good.
Yeah, it's heavy stuff. This book goes behind the scenes of the Eight Passengers YouTube channel. Remember them?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So they were like this huge family, vlogging their daily life, homeschooling, all that.
Right. And Sherry's book reveals a much darker side to their story. We're talking strict religious practices, controversial parenting methods, and the influence of this life coach who seems to have had a grip on the whole family.
It's wild how someone from outside the family can have that much sway.
Yeah, it's a real head scratcher.
Yeah.
And to get the full picture, we're not just looking at the memoir itself, we'll also be pulling from some of Sherry's personal journals.
Oh, wow. So we're getting like the unfiltered, raw version of events.
Exactly. It's going to be fascinating to see how those personal reflections add to the story.
For sure, I'm already hooked. So where do we even begin with this one?
Well, Sherry doesn't shy away from describing her childhood and the really strict conservative LDS environment she grew up in. It sounds like from a young age, there was this intense focus on faith, family, and obedience.
Right. And that kind of sets the stage for the whole story, I think, because it's within that context that we see these early signs of Ruby's need for control.
Ruby being Sherry's mom, for those who don't know.
Exactly. It's like everything had to be a certain way. Everything had to be perfect. And she really seemed to crave that control in every aspect of her life.
Even down to finding a husband.
Oh, yeah, totally. Sherry talks about how Ruby was very strategic in her approach to marriage. It wasn't just about finding love. It was about finding someone who fit into the very specific role she had already envisioned for them.
So basically someone who wouldn't challenge her authority.
Exactly. Someone passive who would let her be the one calling the shots. And that's where Kevin comes in.
Sherry's dad.
Yeah. And from what Sherry describes, he comes across as this really kind, gentle guy, but also someone who, at least in the beginning, seemed content to let Ruby take the reins.
I feel like she handpicked him for that role.
I know, right? And that dynamic, that power imbalance between Ruby and Kevin, it becomes a recurring theme throughout the book. It sets the stage for how the whole family operates.
So let's talk about the Franke family dynamics themselves.
Yeah.
What was daily life like for them?
Well, Shuri paints this pretty vivid picture of their day-to-day routine, and it revolved around scripture study, music practice, homeschooling, all very structured stuff and very limited interactions with the outside world.
It sounds a little suffocating, to be honest.
Yeah, definitely gives off that vibe. And Shuri talks about having anxiety from a young age, about feeling stifled within that rigid structure.
And how did Ruby respond to that? Did she try to understand where Shuri was coming from?
Not really. She seemed to be very dismissive of Sherry's emotions, brushing them off as just childish complaint.
There's this one anecdote that I found so telling. Sherry was having really bad stomach pains and was genuinely worried. And Ruby just dismissed it as nothing.
It's like she couldn't or wouldn't acknowledge Sherry's emotional needs. It was all about maintaining this outward appearance of perfection.
That reminds me of the story about Chad Sherry's younger brother. When he was little, he cut off a chunk of Sherry's hair while they were playing.
Oh, yeah. What was Ruby's reaction to that one?
It was completely over the top. She gave Chad this ridiculous haircut as punishment, like something that would humiliate him.
It's almost like she was making an example out of him, sending this message that any deviation from the norm would be met with harsh consequences.
It's all about control, right? Like even something as small as a haircut becomes this opportunity to assert her dominance.
Exactly. It's really unsettling when you think about it. And this is all before the cameras start rolling, before they become 8 passengers.
So how does this seemingly normal, albeit very strict LDS family end up becoming YouTube famous?
Well, it seems like Ruby's sisters, Ellie and Bonnie, were already kind of big in the family vlogging scene.
It was the early days of family vlogging.
Yeah,
right?
exactly. Like it was just starting to take off. And Ruby, seeing her sister's success, she realized the potential, especially since she had the biggest family.
It's almost like she saw her family size as a competitive advantage.
Right. Like more kids equals more content, equals more views, equals more money.
It's a little unsettling when you frame it like that.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And things really take a turn when a video of Sherry's youngest sister climbing out of her crib goes viral.
That was like their breakout moment.
Pretty much. They hit that magic number of subscribers and suddenly 8 Passengers explodes in popularity.
And that's when the money starts rolling in.
Right.
Brand deals, sponsorships,
Yes.
free stuff galore.
Exactly. Their house becomes the showroom for all these products they're expected to review. And the lines between their real lives and their online persona start to get really blurry.
Shari even admits that she got caught up in it too. She started her own channel, shared really personal stuff to gain views and make money.
It's interesting because she talks about having these conflicted feelings about it all. On one hand, she enjoyed the perks, the free stuff, the excitement of it all. But on the other hand, she felt this immense pressure to perform, to maintain this perfect image for the camera.
And she was just a teenager at this point,
Oh,
right?
yeah, like 15 or 16. Imagine navigating the already complicated world of adolescence while also being thrust into this world of online fame and financial pressures.
It's a lot for anyone to handle, let alone a teenager.
And it's around this time that we see those cracks starting to appear in her relationship with Ruby, even before Jodi Hildebrandt enters the picture.
Okay, so speaking of Jodi, she's a whole other can of worms. We'll dive into her influence and how things really start to unravel in part 2.
Can't wait. Buckle up, folks. It's about to get wild.
For sure. Stay tuned.
Yeah.
It seems like the pressure cooker was already starting to whistle, even before Jodi came along.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I mean, between the strict religious upbringing, the demands of vlogging, and those complicated family dynamics, things were already pretty tense.
So how does Jodi even enter the picture?
It all starts with Chad. Remember him?
Yeah, he was always kind of the rebel of the family, right?
Totally. He was always pushing the boundaries, testing the limits, and it really came to a head when he snuck out of the hotel room during a family trip to Universal Studios.
Oh, wow. I remember that video. Ruby was not happy.
Not happy is an understatement. She was freaking out. And that's when a friend recommended Jodi Hildebrandt.
Who at the time was this up-and-coming life coach, right?
Yeah.
With a program called Connections.
Yeah, exactly. And Jodi marketed herself as someone who could fix troubled kids, get them back on the right path.
Yeah.
So Ruby, being desperate for a solution, she sets up a Zoom call with Jodi.
And what does Jodi recommend?
Well, she suggests sending Chad to this wilderness therapy program in Arizona called Anasazi.
I've heard about those programs. They can be pretty intense.
They are, and they're not cheap either. But Ruby and Kevin were at their wits' end with Chad. They were probably also feeling the pressure of maintaining this perfect image online, and Chad's behavior wasn't exactly helping.
So they were basically looking for a quick fix.
Pretty much. And Jodi presented herself as having all the answers.
The authority figure.
Exactly. And Shari describes watching all this unfold and being absolutely horrified.
I can imagine.
She saw it as this extreme and totally unnecessary measure, but her concerns were basically ignored.
It's like her voice didn't matter.
And that's a theme that continues throughout the whole Jodi saga. It's like Shari's perspective is constantly being dismissed.
So Chad gets shipped off to wilderness therapy, and that's when Jodi's influence really starts to take hold.
Yeah, it's like she embeds herself into the family dynamic. It's not just about Chad anymore. It's about controlling every aspect of their lives.
So what were some of the red flags about Jodi's methods? What made her seem so, cult-like?
Well, there was this big emphasis on control and isolation. She encouraged her students to distance themselves from anyone who questioned her teachings or didn't fully embrace her ideology.
Creating that bubble where her authority was absolute.
Exactly. And Shari even compares it to cult dynamics in the book. There was this intense pressure to conform, to confess your distortions, as Jodi called them.
And Ruby, being someone who already craved control, she just fell right into it.
Hook, line, and sinker. She became totally enamored with Jodi to the point where Jodi actually moved into the Franke family home.
Wait, what?
Yeah, it's wild, right?
I mean, that's a huge step. It's like inviting a stranger into the heart of your family.
And once Jodi was in the house, things got even crazier. The punishments became more severe, more controlling.
We've already talked about Chad sleeping on a beanbag for months.
Right, and that was all Jodi's idea, but there were other instances of isolation and deprivation used as disciplinary measures. It's really disturbing when you think about the impact this had on the kids.
And Shari was trapped in the middle of it all,
Yeah.
feeling powerless to stop it.
She tried to reason with Ruby to express her concerns, but it was like talking to a brick wall. Ruby was completely under Jodi's spell.
Brainwashed.
I think that's a fair assessment. Shari uses that word intentionally to highlight the drastic shift in Ruby's personality. She became more rigid, more judgmental, more fixated on this idea of truth that Jodi preached.
That was his truth, exactly.
Well, Shari doesn't go into great detail about the specifics of Jodi's ideology, But she does mention this book called Visions of Glory, which seems to have been pretty influential in shaping Ruby and Jody's worldview.
And what's that book about?
It's basically a collection of apocalyptic prophecies. It promotes a very specific, and some would say extreme, interpretation of LDS teachings.
So this blend of religious extremism and a personality that thrives on control, it sounds like a recipe for disaster.
It was. And what makes it even more messed up is the hypocrisy of it all. You know, Ruby and Jody were out there presenting this image of perfect family values, righteous living, while behind closed doors they were engaging in behavior that was far from exemplary.
Wait, what do you mean? What kind of behavior?
Well, there are strong hints throughout the book that Ruby and Jody's relationship became more than just a mentorship.
Like romantically?
Yeah, Shari describes finding her mom's room transformed into this romantic setting with candles and massage oils. And when she confronts Ruby about it, Ruby denies everything.
Wow, that adds a whole other layer of complexity to the story. Like Ruby was living a double life.
Exactly. Projecting one image to the world while engaging in behaviors that completely contradicted that image. And all the while, Shari's trying to cope with everything she's witnessing. Dealing with her own anxieties, her feelings of inadequacy, and watching her family implode under the influence of this manipulative outsider.
So what does she do? How does she deal with all of this?
She tries to find ways to escape that environment to find some sense of normalcy. She goes to therapy, but she's too afraid to reveal the full extent of what's happening at home. She starts dating, but it's awkward and doesn't really go anywhere.
Going through the motions.
Exactly. And then she gets accepted to college and makes the decision to move out of the family home.
And that's when things really start to shift.
It is. It's like getting that distance, that space to breathe allows her to see things more clearly.
So she's finally free from the clutches of Jody and Ruby.
Well, not exactly. She's physically away from them, but she's still very much entangled in the drama unfolding back home.
How so?
She tries to warn her siblings about Jody, but they've been conditioned to see Shari as the problem child, the one who's always stirring up trouble.
So her warnings fall on deaf ears.
And meanwhile, the 8 passengers' empire starts to crumble under the weight of public scrutiny.
Right. There was that video where Chad casually mentions sleeping on a beanbag for months.
Yeah, that video went viral for all the wrong reasons, and people started questioning Ruby's parenting methods. The backlash was intense.
And how did Ruby react to all the criticism?
Instead of acknowledging the problem, she doubled down, further entrenching herself in Jody's teachings. You know, that classic cult mentality, us versus the world.
So Shari's caught in the middle, trying to protect her siblings while also navigating her own complicated life away from home.
Right. She moves off campus. She has this really disturbing encounter with a professor who takes advantage of her vulnerability, and she keeps trying to reach out to her family, trying to get them to see the danger they're in.
But it sounds like the more she pushed back against Ruby and Jody, the more alienated she became.
It's this tragic situation where she's trying to do the right thing, but she's constantly being gaslighted and manipulated, told that she's the problem, that she's exaggerating, that she's making things up.
And then she gets this piece of information that forces her to take drastic action.
Yeah, a neighbor contacts Shari and tells her that Ruby has left the younger kids alone for like 5 days.
Oh my God.
That's when Shari knows she can't stay silent anymore. She has to do something to protect her siblings.
So she calls Child Protective Services.
She does. And that call sets in motion a chain of events that will change the Franke family forever.
Calling Child Protective Services on your own family, that's got to be one of the toughest decisions anyone could ever make.
I can't even imagine the weight of that choice.
Yeah.
You know, knowing that it could potentially shatter your family, but also feeling like you have no other option.
And did the authorities step in right away?
It wasn't that simple.
Yeah.
The police did a welfare check on the kids, but they didn't find anything that seemed like, immediate danger.
But I'm guessing Ruby found out that Shari was the one who made the call.
Oh, yeah, and she was not happy about it.
I bet.
Shari describes this huge blow-up with Ruby at her aunt's house. Ruby's accusing her of betrayal, of trying to destroy the family, the whole 9 yards.
So basically, Shari's attempt to protect her siblings backfires and just pushes her further away from everyone.
Exactly. And what's even more concerning is that Shari starts to see how deeply Jody has sunk her claws into Ruby.
Like she's brainwashed her.
It's scary how manipulative Jody was. She had Ruby convinced that she was the victim, that everyone was out to get her.
That whole us against the world mentality.
Exactly. And Shari's left feeling completely alone. Her siblings have turned on her dads under Ruby's thumb. Even her aunts are afraid to get involved. It's like she's lost her entire support system.
It's heartbreaking. And then on top of all that, she has that awful encounter with Derek, the professor.
Right, the one she confided in earlier.
He totally takes advantage of her vulnerability, crosses a line that should never be crossed.
It's just another layer of trauma for Shari to deal with, and it really shows how easily abuse can happen, especially when someone is in a position of power.
And it's a reminder that abuse can take many forms. It's not always physical violence. Sometimes it's about manipulation and control.
Exactly. And for Shari, this experience sends her into a tailspin. She's having panic attacks, struggling to cope, and she's still too scared to tell her therapist the whole truth about her family.
So what helps her turn things around?
Believe it or not, it's a true crime show. She's watching this episode, and something about the case just clicks with her.
Like a light bulb moment.
Totally. She realizes that she's being manipulated, that she deserves better, that she has to break free from Derek's control.
So she finally sees her own situation for what it is.
And that realization gives her the strength to take some big steps. She ends things with Derek, she tells her bishop everything, and she reaches out to her aunts for support. She's done with being silent. She's ready to fight back.
And protect your siblings.
Exactly. She goes to the authorities with evidence of Ruby's abuse, videos, specific incidents that show the neglect and emotional manipulation the kids have been through.
And that's what leads to the raid on Jody's house.
It does. And it's a huge relief when they find the Franke children safe and sound.
Thank goodness.
Yeah.
But I imagine the story doesn't end there.
Nope. Shari still has to deal with the aftermath, the legal stuff, the media frenzy, and the emotional weight of speaking out against her own mother.
I can't imagine how difficult that must have been.
She goes to Ruby's sentencing, and Ruby doesn't even show remorse for what she's done. It's like Shari's lost her entire family. She feels like an orphan. That's so sad. Even though she knows she did the right thing, she's still grieving this huge loss.
It's complicated, right? But even with all that pain and turmoil, Shari finds a way to move forward. She focuses on healing, goes to therapy, adopts a cat named Muppet, and starts to rebuild some relationships with her siblings.
It's a testament to her strength and resilience.
It really is. And, her story raises some important questions about family dynamics, online fame, the dangers of blind faith and unchecked authority. It's a lot to unpack.
It makes you think twice about what you see online, right? Like, those perfect families might not be so perfect after all.
And it highlights how important it is to speak up about abuse, even when it's hard, even when it involves family.
Shari's story is a powerful reminder that silence only protects the abuser.
And speaking truth to power can create real change.
This deep dive has been heavy, but I think it's so important to have these conversations. So thank you for breaking it all down for us.
Of course. It's been my pleasure. And to all our listeners out there, if you're interested in learning more about Shari's story, we highly recommend checking out her memoir, The House of My Mother, A Daughter's Quest for Freedom. There's a link to purchase the book in the show notes.
It's a tough read, but it's worth it.
Absolutely. And as always, we encourage you to share this deep dive with anyone who might find it helpful.
Let's keep these conversations going.
Until next time, keep diving deep and keep questioning everything.